Fernando, there was a story that you posted on Twitter that caught my attention. The headline was pretty jarring. It was an op-ed written in The Guardian. And once you click on it, it says, child labor is exploitation, but the household work I did as a child gave me life skills. The previous, is that the new headline?
No,
I think
that's the new headline. The original one was different.
Right.
The original was very, very different.
Okay. Do we have the original one by any chance, Kale?
If we don't have it, I can read it because I remember it. It says,
yeah, please do.
It says, the original headline was, child labor doesn't have to be exploitation. It gave me life skills. So different framing, and I think everyone freaked out. They were like, what are you talking about, person in The Guardian? But the more shocking aspect of the whole thing was that this op-ed was sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly couldn't believe this was published. And so the writer tries to make a distinction between child exploitation through child labor and, learning valuable life skills when you're doing child labor in the context of your home, I guess. And so, she talks about how when she was a child, when she was as young as 8, for instance, she had to walk nearly 1.5 miles in hot weather in order to fetch water for the family. Then she had to prepare food for her family. And then after, a long day of work, she had to take care of her siblings. And she, concludes, this whole life experience by saying this or writing this. Through a Western lens, some might view my experience as child labor. To me, I was learning life skills. And then she continues to write, multinational companies make billions of dollars a year selling cigarettes in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere. The tobacco is produced in tough conditions, much of it by children aged under 14. These practices are rightly considered exploitative. Can be physically and mentally harmful and detrimental to children's futures by keeping them out of school. But, and then there's like that big but moment in her piece. It was almost as if like, hey, here's the quick blurb I'll write for plausible deniability. And then follow it by child labor is actually great. It teaches you character. I mean, that was really the feel of the piece. And it was like just shocking that The Guardian thought it was a good idea to publish that, in my opinion.
I think one of the things I find very interesting about it is, like, without going into total horseshoe stuff here, the way in which some of this more woke language now has come almost entirely back around to what the old colonialists and imperialists used to say. Oh, well, the West can expect all these kind of things like abandoning child labor and having some kind of decent standard of living. But you people, but in the West, these are cultural expectations that we can't impose onto the peoples of Africa who are just not quite ready for all of that yet. It's incredible when you think about it. These arguments are actually not new. The arguments against, for people who are, if you read back in the day, people who were in favor of child labor, they said the same bloody thing. They said, the kids should be allowed to do this because when they come from poor backgrounds, they need to be able to learn these skills early in their lives in order to train them up so that they can participate in the economy. And it's just this patrician attitude of like elitists who want to get rid of this child labor stuff. It's exactly the same arguments that were had back in the days when people were trying to do away with child labor in the first instance. We're now back to them, but just with this like kind of woke gloss, which is, you're looking at this through a Western lens.
Yeah, you're being Eurocentric.
Yeah. Whereas those of us who are part of, let's be honest, if you're writing in The Guardian for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, those of us who are now part of the elite in African society, we understand really that, the people who we exploit are happy with their exploitation. They're, jolly child laborers. It's the bigotry of diminished expectations. And it is sad. It's actually one of the big reasons why I think all of this kind of guff that comes out from the liberal elite layers in African politics is so sad, is because for such a long time there were these movements, the anti-colonial movements, which got such a distance to improving the lives of African people, and they were smashed and defeated by imperial projects, whether it was, the killing of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, which is, the most resource-rich country in the world, whether it was killing Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, the defeat of Nkrumah in Ghana. You can go through all of the great leaders who tried to actually organize their people to fight back against the domination of big Western corporations in the period after colonialism. One by one, they were knocked off and defeated, in many cases actually just outright killed, because, whereas in the West, Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders can be just discredited. That's not enough. It does remind you what they would do to us if we were in another part of the world. Let's be totally honest. In countries across Africa, liberation leaders and leftists were killed. And in the aftermath of the kind of desert that imperialism has created through destroying so many social movements in Africa, you get this stuff. You get, now we're going to go back in the Guardian, in like the center-left newspaper of Britain, one of the most read so-called progressive institutions in the world. We're going to go back to saying child labor is actually all right because of cultural reasons.
If the Bill Gates Foundation pays for it.
Yeah. Which is preposterous.
Yeah, and she poses this question, which completely speaks to what you were saying, Ronan. She writes, however, where do you draw the line between what is internationally deemed a crime and a natural process of transferring skills? Is international concern on child rights relevant to Africa? It's amazing. It's like the playbook that you perfectly described was used in this argument. It's incredible.
It's like that classic drill tweet where it's like, are drunk driving laws immoral because it makes some people late for work? It's like we cannot know. These things are impossible to know where to draw the line. It's impossible to know. And it strikes me like it reminds me all these arguments are. This is like a very twisted and sick one version of it, but it's no different also from the arguments that the Uber CEO is using to push Prop 22. That just what are you gonna tell a worker like when he can and can't work? Like they should have the freedom to choose those things, and they can build and structure their lives the way they see fit, because they know better than you elitist prick. They use the same tricks over and over again.
I think they also, like, when you look at the way in which this is, being structured in relation to the global economy, this is not a fluke. And this is why it's so important we build our own institutions, because, relying on the likes of the Guardian comes with these huge costs. People in the liberal sectors of the business elite are looking at the rising cost of wages in countries like China, which have a huge amount of the production in the world economy, and also other countries of Eastern Asia. And they're asking themselves, what in the name of God are we going to do when in 10 or 15 and 20 years to squeeze the profits out from, the shifting of production to poorer countries, and they're starting to prepare the ground again for the justification of all kinds of stuff. Already industries like coltan in Africa and all the rest of it are absolutely appalling in terms of their labor standards, and with so many kids who are actually mining the things that go into our iPhones and all the rest of it. Already it's in a dreadful state, but they're preparing the ground for the next stage, which is that all of this is going to now be justified, and it's going to be justified with cultural arguments, which is against the socialist ideas of universalism, that everyone on the planet is entitled to basic standards of living. They're entitled to decency at work. They're entitled to dignity in their lives. They're entitled to public services and healthcare and education. And these are our arguments. But the liberals' arguments, because, they've got to fit it within the capitalist system. Oh, no, there are these cultural differences that mean that actually it's fine in Africa. It's, which is a way of, explaining why it's not fine here. It's not fine here and it is fine in Africa because cultural distinctions, where rather than the fact that actually, all of Africa's wealth has gone to lining Western elites' pockets for generations.
The other thing that really bothers me about this, outside of the arguments, is the Bill Gates thing. It's funny. I joked on it on Twitter, like the QAnon people are right because everyone thinks Bill Gates is like a pedophile, and like him advocating for child labor laws just feeds into that narrative. But like the real sinister thing about all of this is that maybe not the real sinister, but one of the sinister aspects about all this is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are very savvy about doing things like sponsoring content for news organizations that are strapped for cash. And in the United States, what they focus on almost exclusively is public school privatization. And they'll just fund these giant, very incredibly generous grants to news organizations to do educational content. I think NBC News has a big grant from them and things like that. And what they do is basically buy propaganda, the ability to propagandize in the mainstream media for their whatever hobby horse issues they care about, because they're billionaires and they can do it. In this case, for Bill and Melinda Gates in the United States, it's always charter schools and school privatization. In Africa, it's now apparently abolishing child labor laws. So yeah.
This question of the media, I know Anna was going to discuss some of these media questions at some stage, but I think it's so important. It's another one of those areas that the fundamental line between being a liberal and being a socialist in terms of how you understand what the media is about. Is it this kind of intrepid institution where the journalists are going in to find out what the powerful are doing about us, or is the fundamental nature of the media that it's projecting the opinions and views of very wealthy people around the world? And you just need to look at the structure of it. You need to look at who funds it. For instance, in Britain, as I said, a majority of all the newspapers people read every day owned by two corporations, Rupert Murdoch's News UK and the Daily Mail Group. And if you're super wealthy, you can just use those to project your views. And actually, I think it's also a question for alternative media. Like people say to us, that thing you guys will be here a lot in the States, why don't we just have a tea party of the left and whatever? Well,
that.
Well, then, give us the Koch brothers of the left, and maybe we will. Right. The problem is that we're sitting in a situation where these so-called great and very successful right-wing alternative media outlets that have been used to create the Trump phenomenon and whatever else are funded by hugely wealthy interests, usually billionaires, who have no interest in whether they make money or not. They don't have to try and stand on their own feet. They just throw endless supplies of money at them because they shape the political landscape in their interests. And we don't have anything comparable on our side of the aisle. I mean, the question for us, some trade unions might have some funds, but they've obviously got to use those in lots of cases to fight other battles. But they're really the only institutional funders of any significance. You do get the occasional kind of, say, Silicon Valley Bernie bro or something who'll break, but it's not enough. I mean, systemically, it's not enough. The right has this endless supply, and so they look like they're making this great success out of their alternative media. But we would be doing the same if someone handed us £1 billion to build our institute.
What would you do with £1 billion? I would do two chicks at the same time, but I don't know. What about you? What would Tribune do?
What would I do with £1 billion? That is a question. I think the video side of things, but based on the fact that the algorithms of these social media companies are now being so weighted towards video, that you've got to be serious about trying to engage that medium. The problem of it is, say for Tribune, and this is letting people look under the hood, which is I'm always nervous about, but whatever, I'll do it. We're in that section. So it's very hard to monetize video. By contrast to, say, for instance, when you've got an article up on your site and people are coming in to read it and they can see a link to subscribe and they go through, they make it very, very difficult, these social media platforms, to monetize video, because what they want actually is this perfectly sealed space where people are scrolling down, they see one video and they don't leave it to go to another website. What they stay and they go to the next video and the next video and the next video. That's what they're trying to create, so that all the traffic stays within Facebook, for instance. And that makes it very, very hard to monetize it on our side. Obviously, YouTube, it's somewhat different, but it's still incredibly difficult to be able, you have to build these huge audiences. And YouTube has made it much harder in the past few years to build. So this is the other thing that's happened now, that the social media kind of what was quite a scrappy upstart section of capitalism became basically the dominant fraction of capital, is they've now made it much harder to get in the game. So if you are not in early and established a big audience, it's now very, very hard to get broad audiences quickly. through setting up, new channels and whatever else, because the system is kind of, the algorithms are weighted against you. I do think you have to do something about that. £1 billion, man, is so far off what.
By the way, before I get canceled, that was an Office Space reference. You kids just don't remember the good movies from the 90s.